Welcome to Dreadtime Stories. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Your choice to watch this channel means a lot to me. Tonight, I have a spine-chilling collection of scary stories set in the rain for you to enjoy. So, let's get comfortable and allow the darkness overtake us. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up, I was the kind of kid who needed to see to believe. But then I became a father, and my daughter, Lily, changed everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Tom, and this is the story of how a little girl and her ghostly friend opened my eyes to the mysteries of the other side. It all started when we moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that creaked and groaned with history, full of nooks and crannies that seemed to whisper secrets from the past. My wife, Sarah, fell in love with it immediately, charmed by its character and potential. I was more practical, but I couldn't deny the appeal of the place. Lily, our 7-year-old, was thrilled. She spent her days exploring every inch of the house, her imagination running wild possibilities. It wasn't long before she discovered the attic, a dusty space filled with forgotten relics and cobwebbed corners. One night, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Daddy, do you believe in ghosts?" I chuckled, ruffling her hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" She looked at me with wide, serious eyes. "Because I met one. His name is Oliver, and he visits me at night." I tried to hide my surprise. "A ghost, huh? What does Oliver look like?" "He's a little boy about my age," she said, her voice full of wonder. "He wears old-fashioned clothes and has a funny hat. He tells me stories about where he comes from." I smiled, indulging her imagination. "What kind of stories?" "Spooky ones," she whispered, her eyes shining with excitement. "About the other side and all the things he's seen." I kissed her goodnight, thinking it was just a phase, product of her vivid imagination and our new mysterious house. But as the days turned into weeks, Lily's stories about Oliver became more detailed, more intricate. She spoke of adventures they had together, of places and people she couldn't possibly know about. Concerned, I decided to investigate. I spent nights listening outside her door, hoping to catch a glimpse of her imaginary friend. But all I ever heard were Lily's soft giggles and the occasional murmur of her voice, as if she were having a conversation with someone only she could see. Then, one night, I heard something different. Faint, melodic humming, like a lullaby from another time. It was beautiful and haunting, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I opened the door, but the room was empty except for Lily, fast asleep in her bed. Couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening. I started researching the history of our house, digging through old records and talking to longtime residents. What I discovered was both fascinating and unsettling. In the early 1900s, family had lived in our house. They had a son named Oliver, who tragically died at a young age. The details were scarce, but the story was enough to make me question everything. Could it be possible that Lily's ghostly friend was real? I decided to confront Lily about it, choosing my words carefully. "Sweetheart, about your friend Oliver, does he ever say where he goes when he's not with you?" Lily nodded, expression serious. "He says he goes back to the other side, where he watches over his family and friends. He says it's a nice place. He likes visiting me because I'm his friend." Innocence and sincerity struck a chord in me. I realized then that whether Oliver was real or a figment of Lily's imagination, he brought her comfort and joy. Who was I to take that away from her? Over time, I began to accept Oliver's presence. I never saw him myself, but I felt his influence in our home. Little things, like the way the air seemed to shimmer with warmth and the sense of peace that settled over us at night. Lily continued to share Oliver's story, each one more fantastical than the last. He spoke of shadowy forests filled with whispering trees, of ancient castles where the past and present intertwine, and of a river that flowed with memories of those who had crossed over. As the years passed, Lily grew older, and her visits with Oliver became less frequent. She made new friends, became engrossed in school and activities, but she never forgot her ghostly companion. Occasionally, she'd mention him in passing, a fond smile on her lips. One evening, as we sat together, looking through old family photos, Lily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Oliver is still watching over us, Daddy?" I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I think he is, sweetheart. I think he's always with us, in his own way." Lily smiled, satisfied with my answer. And in that moment, I realized that Oliver had given us a gift far beyond spooky stories and ghostly visits. He had shown us the power of imagination, the importance of friendship, and the enduring connection between the living and the departed. Even now, as I write this, I sometimes feel a gentle presence in our home, a reminder of the little boy who once befriended my daughter. And though I may never fully understand the mysteries of the other side, I am grateful for the lessons it taught us and the love that transcends even the boundaries of life and death. So if you ever find yourself in an old house with creaking floors and whispering walls, listen closely. You never know who might be waiting to share their stories with you from a world just beyond our own. In the heart of the city, nestled between towering skyscrapers, stood an unassuming little shop. Timeless wonder. To most passers-by, it was just another antique store, filled with dusty clocks and forgotten trinkets. But to those who knew its secret, it was a gateway to the past. I inherited the shop from my grandfather, a man shrouded in mystery and eccentricity. He was a timekeeper, one of the few who could navigate the delicate threads of time without unraveling them. When he passed, he left me the shop and a cryptic note. "Guard the clocks, for they guard us all." First, I thought it was just the ramblings of an old man. But as I spent more time in the shop, I began to notice things. Certain clocks would chime at odd hours, their hands spinning wildly before settling back into place. Customers would come and go, speaking in strange dialects and wearing clothes from different eras. One evening, as I was closing up, I heard a faint ticking coming from the back room. It was a clock I had never seen before, hidden beneath a dusty tarp. Its face was ornate, with intricate gears visible through a glass casing. As I reached out to touch it, the room spun around me, and I found myself standing in the middle of a bustling 19th century street. I quickly realized that this clock was a portal, a doorway to different time. But I wasn't alone. Throughout history, there have been others like me, timekeepers entrusted with maintaining the delicate balance of time. With the clock, I could visit any era, witness historical events, and even interact with people long gone. But there were rules. It couldn't change anything significant, couldn't alter the course of history. My role was to observe, to ensure that time flowed as it should. For months, I explored the past, reveling in the wonder of it all. I watched the pyramids being built, walked the streets of ancient Rome, and listened to Shakespeare recite his own sonnets. But with each journey, I felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. One day, a woman entered the shop, eyes filled with desperation. She had discovered the secret of the clocks and begged me to let her go back to save her son, who had died in a tragic accident. Her plea tore at my heart, but I knew the dangers of tampering with time. Reluctantly, I agreed to let her visit the past, but only as an observer. As she stepped through the portal, I felt a ripple in the fabric of time, a warning that something was amiss. When she returned, she was inconsolable. She had witnessed her son's death again, unable to intervene. In her grief, she lashed out, blaming me for her pain. I tried to comfort her, but she vanished into the night, leaving me with a heavy heart and a growing sense of unease. The next morning, I awoke to chaos. The clocks in the shop were spinning wildly, their chimes creating a cacophony of sound. The portal clock was glowing, gears grinding with an ominous urgency. I realized that the woman's actions had caused a fracture in time, a ripple that threatened to unravel everything. I had to fix it, to restore the balance before it was too late. With the portal clock in hand, I embarked on a journey through time, tracing the ripple to its source. I traveled to the moment of the woman's son's accident, watching from the shadows as events unfolded. It was then that I saw the true cause of the ripple. Another timekeeper, one who had gone rogue, was manipulating events for his own gain. He was using the chaos to amass power, to reshape history according to his own desires. I confronted him. A battle of wills and wits spanned centuries. We clashed in the shadows of history, our actions unseen by those around us. It was a struggle to maintain the integrity of time, prevent the rogue timekeeper from rewriting the past. In the end, I managed to trap him in a temporal loop, a prison of his own making. With the balance restored, I returned to the shop, weary but victorious. The clocks were silent once more, their hands moving in harmony with the rhythm of time. But I knew that my role as a timekeeper was far from over. There would always be those who sought to exploit the power of time, to bend it to their will. As I sat in the quiet of the shop, I reflected on the burden of my responsibility. Time was a fragile tapestry, and I was its guardian. I had learned that even the smallest actions could have profound consequences, that the past was not to be trifled. The woman's plea still haunted me, reminder of the human cost of my duty. But I understood now that my role was not to change the past, but to protect it, to ensure that the stories of history unfolded as they were meant to. And so, I continued my work, a silent guardian of time, watching over the clocks that guarded us all. For in the end, time was both our greatest gift and our most formidable foe, a force that shaped our lives in ways we could never fully comprehend. It all started when I took a job as a night watchman for the old railway depot in the small town of Eldred. The depot had been closed for decades, ever since the tragic accident that claimed the lives of dozens of passengers and crew. The train, known as the Midnight Express, had derailed on a stormy night, plunging into the ravine below. The wreckage had never been fully cleared, and the track was left to rust and decay. My job was simple. Keep an eye on the property, deter vandals, and ensure that the depot remained undisturbed. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I welcomed it. After a messy divorce and a series of dead-end jobs, the quiet nights gave me time to think and regroup. One particularly foggy night, as I made my rounds, I heard a distant whistle. It was faint at first, almost like the wind playing tricks on my ears. But as I listened, it grew louder, more insistent. I felt a chill run down my spine. There hadn't been a train on these tracks for years. Curiosity piqued. I followed the sound to the edge of the depot, where the forgotten tracks disappeared into the fog. That's when I saw it. Train, shimmering with an ethereal glow, emerging from the mist. It was the Midnight Express, its carriages intact, its engine belching ghostly steam. I stood frozen, unable to believe my eyes. The train slowed as it approached, coming to a stop right in front of me. The doors opened with a creak, and I could see figures inside, their faces pale and expressionless. Compelled by a force I couldn't explain, I stepped aboard. The interior was both familiar and strange, like a snapshot from the past. Passengers were dressed in period clothing, their eyes vacant, their bodies swaying gently with the motion of the train. As I moved through the carriages, I realized that these were the spirits of those who had died in the accident. They were trapped in a loop, reliving their final journey over and over again. I could feel their sadness, their longing for closure. In the dining car, I encountered the conductor, a tall man with a kindly face. He tipped his hat to me, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Granger. We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" I stammered, taken aback. "Why?" "You have a role to play," he replied cryptically. "A chance to set things right." He led me to a compartment at the back of the train, where a group of passengers sat in silence. Among them was a young woman with striking green eyes. She looked at me with a mix of hope and despair. "This is Emily," the conductor said. "She was on her way to meet her fiancé when the accident happened. She never got the chance to say goodbye." I felt a pang of sympathy for all of them. They were caught in a liminal space, unable to move on. I knew then that I had to help them find peace. Over the next few nights, I returned to the Phantom train, learning more about the passengers and their unfinished business. Each had a story, connection to the world they had left behind. I became their confidant, their link to the living. Emily's story touched me the most. Her fiancé, James, had never recovered from her loss. He visited the depot every year on the anniversary of the accident, leaving flowers on the tracks. I realized that if I could bring him to the train, perhaps they could find the closure they needed. On the night of the anniversary, I waited for James at the depot. When he arrived, I told him everything, expecting him to dismiss me as a madman. But to my surprise, he listened, eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and hope. As the Phantom train appeared, I led him aboard. Emily was waiting, her face lighting up with a joy that transcended the spectral realm. They embraced, their love bridging the gap between life and death. The other passengers watched, their faces softening as if a weight had been lifted. I sensed that this reunion was the key to freeing them all. As the train prepared to depart, the conductor approached me once more. "Thank you, Mr. Granger. You've given us a gift beyond measure." With that, the Midnight Express began to move, its passengers waving goodbye as it disappeared into the fog. The whistle echoed one last time, then faded into silence. I stood there, the tracks empty before me, feeling a profound sense of peace. The spirits had found their way home, and I had played a part in their journey. In the weeks that followed, the depot seemed lighter, as if the shadows had lifted. I continued my duties as night watchman, but the Phantom train never returned. I knew it had completed its final journey, carrying its passengers to the other side. The experience changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I learned that the past is never truly gone, that the bonds of love and loss transcend even death. And I discovered that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most profound revelation. To anyone who finds themselves at the crossroads of the living and the dead, remember the Midnight Express and the souls it carries. Listen to the whispers of the past, for they may hold the key to healing wounds that time alone cannot mend. As for me, I remain at the depot, a guardian of its secret, grateful for the chance to have witnessed the extraordinary journey of the Phantom train. The Majestic Grand Hotel stood in the heart of our city for over a century. It was a place of elegance and history, attracting guests from all over the world. As the manager, I took pride in maintaining its reputation for excellence and discretion. Room 1313 was on the top floor with a stunning view of the city skyline. It was one of our most requested suites, popular among honeymooners and business executives alike. But that all changed on a stormy night in October. The first incident occurred when a young couple checked in for their honeymoon. They seemed so happy, full of love and excitement for their future together. But at 3 a.m., they came rushing down to the lobby, pale and shaking. The bride was in tears. Groom looked like he'd seen a ghost. They told me a story that I initially dismissed as a nightmare or a prank. They claimed that in the middle of the night, the room had transformed around them. The elegant decor had given way to a scene of violence and despair. They saw shadowy figures fighting, heard screams of anguish, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I apologized for their distress, offered them another room, and made a mental note to have maintenance check for any issues that might have caused such vivid hallucination. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, more guests reported similar experiences in room 1313. A businessman woke up to find himself in what appeared to be a 1920s speakeasy, witnessing a brutal gangland murder. A retired couple saw the room transform into a World War II field hospital, surrounded by the dying and wounded. Each time, the visions lasted only a few minutes before the room returned to normal. The terror they instilled in our guests was all too real. I knew I had to investigate. I spent nights in room 1313, hoping to experience these visions for myself. For several nights, nothing happened. But on the seventh night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., I understood why our guests had been so terrified. The room shimmered and changed before my eyes. I found myself in the midst of a scene from the 1800s. A woman in a Victorian dress was arguing with a man, their voices rising in anger. Suddenly, he struck her, and she fell, hitting her head on the fireplace. I watched in horror as her life ebbed away, the man's face a mask of regret and panic. Just as quickly as it had appeared, vision faded, leaving me alone in the modern hotel room, my heart pounding. Over the next few months, I experienced more of these visions. Each one showed a different tragedy that had occurred in that very space over the decades. A suicide in the 1950s, a drug overdose in the 1970s, a heart attack in the 1990s. It was as if the room was a repository for the pain and suffering of countless souls. I delved into the hotel's history, cross-referencing the visions with old records and newspaper articles. To my astonishment, I found corroborating evidence for many of the events I had witnessed. The room wasn't just haunted, it was a window to the past, replaying the most traumatic moments that had occurred within its. I was faced with a difficult decision. As a manager, I had a responsibility to ensure the comfort and safety of our guests. But as someone who had witnessed these visions, I felt a deeper obligation to the spirits who seemed trapped in an endless cycle of reliving their worst moments. I decided to close room 1313 indefinitely, citing renovations as the official reason. But in secret, I began working with a team of paranormal researchers and historians to understand and potentially resolve the room's dark energy. We tried everything: cleansing rituals, historical research to bring closure to unresolved tragedies, even attempts to communicate with the spirit. Some nights I would sit alone in the room, talking to the empty air, hoping that somehow the lost souls could hear me and find peace. Slowly, things began to change. The visions became less frequent, less intense. Guests in neighboring rooms reported feeling a sense of calm where once there had been an inexplicable unease. But the room was far from cured. Even now, years later, we keep it closed to the public. Sometimes late at night, I'll go up there and sit in the darkness. I can feel the weight of history around me, the echoes of lives lived and lost. I've come to believe that places can hold memories. Trauma can leave an imprint on the very fabric of reality. Room 1313 taught me that the line between past and present, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, is far more blurred than I ever imagined. To those who seek out haunted places for a thrill, I urge caution. The visions you might encounter are not just ghost stories or hallucinations. They are fragments of real lives, real pain, real tragedy. Treat them with respect, with empathy. And if you ever find yourself in a hotel room that feels a little too heavy with history, that seems to whisper with the voices of the past, remember room 1313. Remember that sometimes the most terrifying things are not what goes bump in the night, but the echoes of human suffering that linger long after the living have gone. As for me, I'll continue to watch over room 1313, guardian of its secret, hoping that one day all the souls trapped within find the peace they deserve. Until then, the room remains closed, a silent testament to the enduring power of memory and the thin veil between our world and the next. It had been 15 years since I'd walked these halls as a student. Now, as the new history teacher, I found myself retracing familiar paths, echoes of my past mingling with the chatter of a new generation of students. The school hadn't changed much. Same faded murals, same squeaky floorboards, same inexplicable cold spots that we used to joke were ghost hangouts. It was during my third week that I first saw her. I was working late, grading papers in my classroom, when I felt a sudden chill. Looking up, I saw a girl standing by the window. She was pale, with long dark hair and sad eyes, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 1950s. For a moment, I thought she was a student who had stayed late, but then she turned to me, and I could see right through her to the basketball court outside. My heart raced as she spoke, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're back, Michael. You need to know the truth." Before I could respond, she vanished. I sat there, stunned, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. But deep down, I knew. I had just encountered the ghost that had been the subject of school legend for decades. Over the next few weeks, she appeared to me several times, always when I was alone, always with the same sad eyes. She told me her name was Sarah Collins, and she had been a student at Oakwood in 1956. She spoke of a dark history that the school had buried, cruelties and injustices that had been covered up over the years. At first, I was skeptical, but as Sarah revealed more details, I began to investigate. I spent hours in the school archives, cross-referencing her stories with old records and newspaper clippings. To my shock, I found evidence corroborating much of what she told me. There had been a string of mysterious deaths and disappearances in the 1950s, all hushed up by the school administration. Sarah herself had vanished without a trace in her senior year. The official story was that she had run away, but Sarah's ghost told a different tale. She spoke of a secret society within the school, a group of students and teachers who practiced dark rituals in the basement. They had targeted outcasts and loners, using them in their ceremony. Sarah, a shy and lonely girl, had been one of their victims. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more recent cover-ups. Abuse swept under the rug, bullying incidents that had driven students to despair, teachers who had taken advantage of their positions of power. It seemed that Oakwood High had a long history of protecting its reputation at the cost of its most vulnerable students. Sarah's appearances became more frequent, more urgent. She led me to hidden spaces in the school, a sealed-off room in the basement where I found decades-old occult symbols etched into the walls, a forgotten filing cabinet in the back of the storage room filled with records of complaints that had never been addressed. Other strange things began happening around the school. Students reported seeing ghostly figures in empty classrooms. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain areas. Objects moved on their own. It was as if Sarah's determination to reveal the truth had stirred up other restless spirits. I knew I had to do something with this information, but I was afraid. The current administration might not have been involved in the older incident, but they certainly had a vested interest in keeping the school's dark history buried. And some of the more recent cover-ups implicated people still in positions of power. Sarah sensed my hesitation. One night, as I sat in my classroom pondering my next move, she appeared with a look of fierce determination. "You have to be their voice, Michael," she said. "We couldn't speak up then, but you can now. Don't let our suffering be in vain." Her words steeled my resolve. I compiled all the evidence I had gathered and took it to a journalist friend of mine. Together, we published an exposé that shook the community to its core. The story made national headlines, leading to investigations, resignations, and a complete overhaul of the school's administration and policy. In the aftermath, more former students came forward with their own stories. It was a painful process for the community, but a necessary one. Oakwood High would never be the same, but it had the chance to become something better, to truly serve and protect its students. As for Sarah, I saw her one last time after the story broke. She stood in my classroom, a peaceful smile on her face. "Thank you," she said simply, and then faded away. I never saw her again, but I like to think that she and the other restless spirits of Oakwood finally found peace. Now, as I continue to teach at Oakwood, I feel a profound responsibility, not just to educate my students in history, but to ensure that the hard lessons of our own past are never forgotten. The halls of Oakwood no longer whisper with secrets and regret. Instead, they echo with the voices of students who know they are heard, valued, and protected. I often think about Sarah and the courage it took for her to reach out across the veil of death to right the wrongs of the past. She taught me that sometimes the most important history lessons are the ones that aren't in any textbook, and that the true measure of a school or any institution is not in its reputation, but in how it treats its most vulnerable members. To anyone who walks the halls of an old school and feels a chill, or hears a whisper on the edge of silence, listen closely. The ghosts of the past may have something important to tell you, and it's up to us, the living, to make sure their stories are heard and their lessons are learned. I never asked to be special. Hell, I spent most of my life trying to be normal. But when you're born with 25 chromosomes in a world where everyone else has 24, normal isn't really an option. My name is Jack Harper, and I'm the only known human with an extra chromosome. The 25th chromosome, they call it. Sounds impressive, right? Like I should have superpowers or something. But the reality is far more complicated and, frankly, terrifying. I was born in a small town in the Midwest to parents who had no idea their son was about to turn the scientific world upside down. It wasn't until I started showing differences that the doctors began to take notice. Enhanced cognitive abilities, accelerated physical development, heightened senses, the works. By the time I was 5, I was reading college-level textbooks and solving complex mathematical equations in my head. You'd think being a child prodigy would be awesome. It wasn't. Kids don't like what they don't understand, and boy, did they not understand me. I spent my childhood isolated, studied, poked and prodded by endless streams of scientists and doctors. My parents tried their best. How do you raise a kid who's smarter than you by the time he's in kindergarten? As I grew older, the differences became more pronounced. I could see patterns in everything, in nature, in human behavior, in the stock market. It was like the world was a giant puzzle, and I could see how all the pieces fit together. But with this ability came a crushing sense of responsibility. When you can predict the consequences of people's actions before they even make them, the weight of that knowledge is unbearable. The government took an interest in me. They saw me as a potential asset, a human supercomputer they could use for their own ends. I spent years running, hiding, trying to stay one step ahead of the agencies that wanted to turn me into a weapon. But it wasn't just the government I was running from. As news of my existence spread, religious groups labeled me an abomination, a violation of God's design. Conspiracy theorists claimed I was an alien hybrid or a secret government experiment. And then there were the desperate people, those who thought my abilities could solve all their problems, cure their illnesses, make them rich. I couldn't walk down the street without being recognized, without someone wanting something. 25th chromosome kid, human anomaly, freak of nature. That's all I was to them. It wasn't until I met Dr. Elena Rossi that things began to change. She was a geneticist, brilliant and compassionate, and the first person to look at me and see a human being instead of a scientific curiosity. She offered to help me understand my condition, to study the 25th chromosome, not to exploit it, but to understand it. Working with Elena, I began to unravel the mystery of my extra chromosome. We discovered that it wasn't just an additional copy of an existing chromosome, but an entirely new genetic structure. It seemed to enhance the functions of the other chromosomes, creating a sort of genetic synergy that accounted for my unique abilities. But our research also revealed a dark truth. The 25th chromosome was unstable. As I aged, it was causing accelerated mutations in my other chromosome. In essence, I was evolving at a rapid rate, becoming less human with each passing year. The implications were staggering. Would I continue to evolve until I was no longer recognizably human? Would my mind expand until it could no longer be contained by my physical form? Or would the instability eventually tear my genetic code apart, killing me in the process? Elena and I worked tirelessly to find a way to stabilize my condition. We explored gene therapy, experimental drugs, even quantum entanglement theory. But every potential solution seemed to create more problems. As my condition progressed, I began to experience moments of what I can only describe as transcendence. Periods where I could perceive dimensions beyond our own, where the boundaries between past, present, and future blurred. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. But these episodes came at a cost. Each time I returned feeling less connected to my human self, less anchored to this world. I could feel myself slipping away, becoming something other. Now, as I write this, I'm at a crossroad. Elena believes she's found a way to remove the 25th chromosome to make me normal. But doing so would mean losing all the abilities that define who I am. It would mean becoming someone else entirely. On the other hand, if I do nothing, I'll continue to evolve. I might unlock the secrets of the universe, might transcend humanity altogether. But I might also lose my connection to the human world, people I care about. I might cease to be me in any meaningful sense. But here I am, the man with 25 chromosomes, facing a decision that no human has ever had to make before. Do I hold on to my humanity, or do I embrace the unknown? Do I remain Jack Harper, or do I become something that has no name in any human language? As I stand on the brink of this decision, I can't help but wonder, is this what evolution feels like from the inside? Is this how our ancestors felt as they took that first step from one species to another? Whatever I choose, I know that my decision will have implications far beyond my own life. The 25th chromosome has opened up possibilities that humanity has never dreamed of. Whether that's a gift or a curse, I suppose only time will tell. To anyone reading this in the future, if you're human, treasure your 24 chromosomes and the stability they provide. And if you're something more, well, I hope you found the answers I'm still searching for. The choice lies before me. 24 or 25, human or beyond. By the time you read this, I'll have made my decision. I only hope it's the right one. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when my wife, Sarah, and our 10-year-old daughter, Emily, decided to help clean out my recently deceased grandmother's house. The attic was a treasure trove of memory, filled with dusty boxes and forgotten keepsakes. As we sorted through the remnants of a life well lived, Emily's excited voice cut through the musty air. "Dad, look at this." She held up an old, sepia-toned photograph. It showed a group of people standing in front of a Victorian-era house, our family home for generations. I recognized my great-grandparents and a few great-aunts and uncles. But there, in the background, was something that made my blood run cold. A figure, translucent and ethereal, stood in one of the upstairs windows. It was looking directly at the camera, its features blurred but unmistakably human. "Who's that in the window, Dad?" Emily asked, her finger pointing to the ghostly image. I was stunned, not just by the figure itself, but by the fact that Emily could see it too. I had assumed it was a trick of the light, flaw in the old photograph. But as Sarah leaned in to look, her sharp intake of breath confirmed it. We could all see the spectral figure. "It's probably just a double exposure," I said, trying to rationalize what we were seeing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The figure was too clear, too intentional in its pose. We took the photograph home, and that's when things started to get strange. I showed it to my brother when he visited, but he saw nothing unusual in the picture. Same with our neighbors and Emily's teacher. It seemed that only our immediate family could see the ghostly figure. Intrigued and a little unnerved, I began to investigate. I dug into our family history, poring over old documents and letters. I discovered that the photograph was taken in 1897 during a family reunion, but there was no mention of anything unusual happening that day. As I delved deeper, I started noticing odd occurrences around our house. Objects would move on their own. Cold spots appeared in rooms that were previously warm. Emily began talking about a friendly lady who would visit her at night, describing someone who sounded eerily like my long-dead great-aunt Evelyn. One night, unable to sleep, I went to my study to look at the photograph again. As I stared at it under the dim desk lamp, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The figure in the window had moved. It was no longer looking at the camera, but directly at me. Shaken, I called Sarah. As we both looked at the photo, the figure seemed to beckon to us. Without thinking, I touched the photograph, and the world around us dissolved. Suddenly, we were standing in front of the old house, but it was 1897. Family was gathered for the photograph, just as in the image. But now we could see everything, hear everything. And there, standing next to us, was a young woman with sad eyes and a gentle smile. "Hello, Daniel," she said. "I've been waiting for you." She introduced herself as Margaret, my great-great-aunt. She told us a story that had been lost to time, how she had died just days before the family reunion, but her spirit had lingered, desperate to be part of one last family gathering. The photograph had captured her presence, but only those of her bloodline could see her. Margaret explained that she had been trying to communicate with our family for generations to share a secret that had been buried with them. She spoke of a hidden family legacy, of a gift that ran in our blood, the ability to bridge the gap between the world of the living and the dead. As she talked, I began to understand the strange occurrences in our house, Emily's friendly lady, and our ability to see what others couldn't in the photograph. We weren't just seeing a ghost. We were awakening to a part of ourselves we never knew existed. Before we could ask more questions, the scene began to fade. We found ourselves back in my study, photograph lying innocently on the desk. But now, when we looked at it, we could see Margaret clearly, smiling at us from the window. In the days that followed, our lives changed dramatically. We began to notice things we'd never seen before. Spirits lingering in old buildings, whispers of the past echoing in quiet rooms. Emily's abilities grew stronger, and we realized we needed to guide her in understanding and controlling this newfound gift. I used my skills as a photographer to document our experience, capturing images that revealed to us what others couldn't see. We became a bridge between two worlds, helping lost souls find peace and uncovering long-buried secrets that needed to be brought to light. The old photograph still sits on our mantelpiece, a reminder of the day our eyes were opened to a world beyond our own. Margaret's figure is clear to us now, no longer a mysterious specter, but a beloved family member who reached across time to awaken our true heritage. As I write this, I can feel the presence of those who have gone before us, watching over our family. I've learned that photographs don't just capture a moment in time. They can capture the essence of those long gone, preserving their stories for generations to come. To anyone who might read this, look closely at your old family photographs. You never know what secrets they might reveal, what truths they might uncover. And remember, sometimes the most important things in life are those that can be seen by everyone, only by those with the eyes to truly see. Our family's journey into the unknown has only just begun, guided by a faded photograph and the ghostly figure that changed our lives forever. Who knows what other mysteries await us in the shadowy realm between the living and the dead. It started on a stormy night in my secluded studio on the outskirts of town. I had been working on a large canvas for weeks, pouring my soul into every brushstroke. The painting depicted a surreal landscape, a twisted forest beneath a blood-red sky, shadowy figures lurking among the gnarled trees. I called it the Nightmare Grove. As lightning flashed outside, illuminating my studio in brief electric bursts, I applied the final touches to my masterpiece. The air felt charged, heavy, with an energy I couldn't explain. As I made the last brushstroke, a bolt of lightning struck so close that it shook the entire building. In that moment, I felt a surge of power flow through me and into the painting. The canvas seemed to ripple, like the surface of a disturbed pond. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light. But when I looked again, I saw something that defied explanation. The trees in the painting were moving, swaying in a non-existent wind. Mesmerized, I leaned closer. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper coming from within the canvas. I touched the surface, and to my shock, my hand passed through as if it were water. Before I could pull back, I felt something grab me, yanking me into the painting. I found myself standing in the Nightmare Grove, surrounded by the very landscape I had created. The air was thick and oppressive, filled with an acrid smell that burned my nostril. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Panic set in as I realized the full extent of what had happened. I was trapped inside my own creation, a world born from my darkest imagining. I tried to find a way out, but the forest seemed endless, shifting and changing with each step I took. As I wandered, I encountered the shadowy figures I had painted. They were no longer vague shapes, but fully formed entities. Twisted, nightmarish versions of people. Some I recognized as individuals who had sat for portraits in my studio. Others were amalgamations of faces I had seen in passing, now warped into grotesque caricature. They pleaded with me, begging for release. I learned that I wasn't the first to be pulled into this world. Anyone who had been the subject of one of my paintings over the past year become trapped here, living a half-life in this realm of shadows and fear. I was horrified. Without realizing it, I had been condemning people to this nightmare with each portrait I painted. The guilt was overwhelming, but I knew I had to find a way to fix this, to free everyone I had unwittingly imprisoned. Days passed in this twisted reality, or perhaps it was weeks or months. Time had no meaning here. I searched for a way out, all the while haunted by my creation. The trees whispered accusations, the sky rained blood, and the ground beneath my feet pulsed like a living thing. I discovered that I could manipulate this world to some extent. After all, I was its creator. I focused my will, trying to reshape the landscape, create an exit. But every attempt was thwarted by the malevolent energy that now permeated my creation. As I struggled, I began to understand the true nature of what I had done. My painting had become a conduit for something ancient and evil, force that fed on fear and suffering. It had used my talent, my passion, as a way to enter our world and trap souls within this canvas of nightmare. I realized that the only way to end this was to destroy the painting in the real world. But how could I communicate this to someone on the outside? I focused all my energy, concentrating on projecting my thoughts beyond the canvas. To my surprise, it worked. I found I could appear in reflections in my studio, a ghostly image visible for brief moments. I tried to communicate with anyone who entered, my agent, fellow artists, even the cleaning lady. but they all fled in terror at the sight of my spectral form. Finally, months after my disappearance, my sister came to the studio. As an artist herself, she was more open to the impossible. When she saw my reflection, instead of running, she listened. Through a series of disjointed appearances, I managed to convey what needed to be done. With tears in her eyes, she took a knife to the canvas, slashing it to pieces. As the painting was destroyed in the real world, the nightmare realm began to collapse around us. The trapped souls and I felt a pull, a rush of energy as we were drawn back to reality. I awoke on the floor of my studio, surrounded by the tattered remains of the nightmare grove. The others who had been trapped were there too, all of us shaken and forever changed by our experience. In the aftermath, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The authorities were baffled by the sudden reappearance of several missing persons, all with similar stories of a nightmarish world within a painting. Most wrote it off as a shared delusion, a bizarre case of mass hysteria. But I knew the truth. Had glimpsed a power beyond our understanding, had seen the thin veil between reality and the realm of nightmares. My art had been a conduit for something dark and ancient, and I knew I could never paint again. Now I dedicate my life to searching for other artworks that might serve as doorways to similar realms. I've become a guardian of sort, working to prevent others from unknowingly unleashing the horrors that I did. To any artist reading this, be careful what you create. Art has power to move, to inspire, but also the power to open doors that should remain closed. Remember that every brushstroke, every line, every splash of color has the potential to bring your deepest nightmares to life. As for me, the images of the Nightmare Grove still haunt my dreams. Sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can hear the whispers of the trees and feel the gaze of shadowy figures watching me from just beyond the veil of reality. The curse of the painting may be broken, but its effects will linger with me forever. I never believed in demons or possession. That is, until I became the unwitting witness to a terrifying entity that wore the face of kindness to spread chaos and fear. My name is Jack Thompson, and this is the story of how I uncovered the truth about Mrs. Abernathy, the sweet old lady who wasn't what she seemed. It all started when I moved to the small town of Millbrook to take a job as the local high school's new English teacher. Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked at night, and where the biggest excitement was the annual fall festival. At least, that's what I thought. Mrs. Abernathy lived next door to me. She was in her 80s, a widow who spent her days tending to her garden and baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. She had a kind smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed. I thought she was the perfect embodiment of small-town charm. But then strange things started happening. It began with small incidents, pets going missing, gardens being destroyed overnight, strange noises echoing through the streets at night. At first, people chalked it up to wild animals or mischievous teenagers. But as the incidents escalated, a palpable sense of unease settled over Millbrook. I started noticing odd things about Mrs. Abernathy. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her kind smile would twist into a malicious grin. I caught glimpses of her in places she shouldn't have been able to reach, given her age and frailty. There were moments when her eyes seemed to flicker, revealing something dark and ancient behind them. One night, I woke to the sound of chanting coming from her house. Curious and a bit unnerved, I peered out my window. What I saw chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Abernathy was in her backyard, surrounded by candles, performing some kind of ritual. But it wasn't her frail, elderly form I saw. It was a twisted, shadowy figure that seemed to shift and change as I watched. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. But the next day, when I saw Mrs. Abernathy happily watering her plants, I knew something was terribly wrong. I started investigating, discreetly at first. I talked to longtime residents, piecing together the town's history. I learned that every few decades, a wave of unexplained events would sweep through Millbrook, always coinciding with the arrival of a new, kindly old woman in town. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a pattern stretching back centuries. The entity, whatever it was, would possess an elderly woman, using her as a vessel to infiltrate and terrorize the community. It fed on fear and chaos, growing stronger with each act of malice it committed. But knowing the truth and proving it were two different things. Who would believe that sweet Mrs. Abernathy was actually a demonic entity? I knew I had to gather evidence, find a way to expose the creature for what it really was. I set up hidden cameras, recorded the strange occurrences, and even managed to capture one of the entity's rituals on film. But every time I tried to show someone, footage would mysteriously corrupt, or the person I confided in would suddenly forget our conversation. The entity was on to me. Strange accidents started happening. My brakes failed while driving. A tree nearly fell on me during a storm. I narrowly avoided food poisoning. Each incident could be explained away, but I knew the truth. The demon was trying to silence me. Things came to a head one night when I caught Mrs. Abernathy, or rather the thing wearing her face, in the act of abducting a child. I intervened. For a moment, the creature dropped its disguise. I saw its true form, a writhing mass of shadows with glowing red eyes and a maw full of razor-sharp teeth. We fought, a battle that was as much spiritual as it was physical. I found myself drawing on strength I didn't know I had, reciting prayers and incantations I'd uncovered in my research. The entity was strong, but it had grown complacent over the centuries, used to hiding behind a benign facade. In the end, I managed to banish it, sending it howling back to whatever dark realm it came from. Mrs. Abernathy, the real one, collapsed, finally free from the demon's control. She had been its prisoner for years, forced to watch helplessly as it used her body to commit unspeakable acts. The aftermath was chaotic. Some people in town remembered everything, while others seemed to be under a kind of spell, unable to reconcile the truth with their perception of sweet old Mrs. Abernathy. The official story became one of a disturbed elderly woman with a split personality, but those of us who knew the truth would never forget. As for me, I couldn't stay in Millbrook. The experience had changed me, opened my eyes to a world of shadows and entities that existed just beyond our perception. I left my teaching job and dedicated myself to researching similar cases, determined to help other communities that might be facing their own Mrs. Abernathy. Sometimes late at night, I still hear whispers on the wind, feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I know the entity is still out there, perhaps wearing a new face in a different town, and I know that one day our paths will cross again. To anyone reading this, look closely at the kindly faces around you. Sometimes the most insidious evil wears the mask of innocence, and in quiet towns where nothing ever seems to happen, the darkest secrets often lurk just beneath the surface. I never should have opened that dusty old trunk in my grandfather's attic, but as a struggling composer, I was desperate for inspiration. My name is Daniel Hartley, and this is the story of how I unleashed a symphony of horror on the world. It was a crisp autumn day when I found it, a yellowed manuscript, its pages brittle with age. The title, scrawled in faded ink, read, "The Demonic Symphony" by Alistair Blackwood, my great-great-grandfather. I'd heard whispers about Alistair, a brilliant but troubled composer who disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1888. Family lore said he'd made a deal with dark forces for his musical genius. Intrigued, I took the manuscript home. As I pored over the notes, I felt a chill run down my spine. The composition was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Complex, haunting, that underlying rhythm that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Against my better judgment, I decided to play it. As my fingers touched the keys of my piano, the room grew cold. First notes hung in the air, vibrating with an unnatural resonance. And then, as I played the final chord of the first movement, something impossible happened. A figure materialized before me, a translucent, shimmering apparition of a woman in Victorian dress. Her eyes were hollow, her face a mask of terror. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if from a great distance. "You've awakened us," she whispered. "Now you must hear our tales." Before I could respond, she launched into her story. She spoke of a jealous husband, a wrongful accusation, and a gruesome death at the bottom of a well. As she talked, I could see the events unfolding before my eyes, as vivid as if I were there. When her tale ended, she faded away, only to be replaced by another spirit, a young chimney sweep, his face blackened with soot. His story was one of cruel masters and a fiery demise. With growing horror, I realized what was happening. Each movement of the symphony was summoning a different spirit, each with its own tale of terror to tell. I wanted to stop playing, to slam the lid of the piano shut and burn the cursed manuscript, but couldn't. My hands moved of their own accord, compelled by some unseen force to continue the performance. As the night wore on, a parade of ghosts appeared before me. A hanged man, wrongly accused of murder, a plague victim, abandoned by her family, a soldier betrayed by his comrades. Each spirit more tormented than the last, each story more horrifying. The room filled with their presence, the air thick with the weight of their suffering. I could feel their pain, their anger, their despair. It was overwhelming, suffocating. As I neared the final movement, a new figure appeared. Unlike the others, this one was solid, corporeal. It was Aleister Blackwood himself, looking exactly as he did in the old family portrait. "Well played, great-grandson," he said, a wicked smile playing on his lips. "You've done what I could not. You've completed the symphony." With dawning terror, I understood. Aleister hadn't disappeared. He'd become trapped in his own creation, unable to finish the piece that would set the spirits free. And now I had unwittingly completed his work. "What have I done?" I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. Aleister's smile widened. "You've opened the door, my boy, and now it's time for us to step through." As the final notes of the symphony faded away, I felt a tugging sensation, as if my very soul was being pulled from my body. The spirits swirled around me, their voices rising in a cacophony of triumph and despair. I fought against it, clinging desperately to my physical form. But the pull was too strong. I could feel myself fading, becoming one with the spectral host. In my last moments of consciousness, I saw Aleister step towards my piano, his form becoming more solid with each step. He sat down, flexing his fingers as if testing them for the first time in centuries. "Thank you for the vessel, Daniel," he said, his voice now coming from my own mouth. "I think I'll enjoy being alive again." Then, darkness. I don't know how long I've been trapped in this limbo, this space between worlds. Time has no meaning here. I exist as a spirit among spirits, each of us bound to the cursed symphony that gave voice to our tales of woe. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the world of the living. I see Aleister wearing my face, living my life. He's become a celebrated composer, his music, my music, touching the hearts of millions. If only they knew the dark power behind those beautiful melodies. I try to warn people, to reach out across the veil and make them understand the danger. But my voice is just another whisper in the spectral choir, lost in the haunting refrain of the demonic symphony. To anyone who might hear this tale, beware of music that speaks to your soul too deeply. In its notes may lurk a power beyond your understanding, a symphony of the damned waiting to claim new voices for its eternal performance. And if you ever come across a composition by Aleister Blackwood or Daniel Hartley, I beg you, do not play it. For the price of that music is your very soul, and the concert never truly ends. In the small, unassuming town of Eldridge, there was a place known only in whispers and hushed conversations, the Eldridge Asylum. Abandoned for decades, it sat on the outskirts, shrouded in mystery and overgrown with ivy. The townsfolk spoke of it as a place of darkness, where the echoes of the forgotten lingered, and the past refused to rest. I was drawn to Eldridge by a letter from my estranged uncle, a man I barely knew. He had been the last caretaker of the asylum before it shut down, and his letter was cryptic, filled with ramblings about unfinished business and secrets that must be revealed. It ended with a plea. Come to Eldridge, find the truth. Curiosity piqued and a sense of familial duty compelling me, I packed my bags and set off for the town. Eldridge was quaint, with cobblestone streets and old-world charm, but there was an undercurrent of unease, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The asylum loomed on the horizon, a monolithic structure, crumbling stone and broken windows. As I approached, I felt a chill in the air, a sense of being watched. The gates creaked open at my touch, and I stepped inside, the weight of history pressing down on me. The interior was a maze of corridors and empty rooms, each one echoing with the faint whispers of the past. I wandered through the halls, my footsteps stirring up dust and memories. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something intangible that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. In the main hall, I found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. It belonged to my uncle, detailing his time as the caretaker. His entries spoke of strange occurrences, of voices in the night and shadows that moved on their own. He wrote of patients who vanished without a trace, their records erased, their existence forgotten. As I read, I felt a presence behind me, cold breath on my neck. I turned, but the hall was empty. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping, each one pleading to be heard. Driven by an inexplicable urge, I followed the whispers deeper into the asylum, descending a spiral staircase that led to the basement. The air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. At the bottom, I found a locked door, its surface etched with symbols I couldn't decipher. The whispers reached a crescendo, urging me to open the door. With trembling hands, I turned the handle, and the door creaked open to reveal a hidden chamber. Inside, I found rows of filing cabinets, each one filled with patient record. These were the forgotten, the ones my uncle had written about. Their stories were tragic, tales of suffering and neglect, of experiments conducted in the name of science. But there was something else, an account of a ritual, a desperate attempt by the asylum's founder to harness the power of the human mind. The ritual had gone horribly wrong, trapping the souls of the patients within the asylum, their voices forever echoing in the halls. As I read, the air shimmered, and the room filled with ghostly figures, their faces etched with sorrow. They surrounded me, their eyes pleading for release. I understood then that my uncle's unfinished business was to set them free, end their torment. With newfound determination, I searched the chamber for clues, piecing together the ritual's components. It required a connection to the past, a willingness to bear witness to their pain. I stood in the center of the chamber, the ghosts forming a circle around me. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind, inviting their stories to flow through me. The experience was overwhelming, a torrent of emotions and memories, of lives cut short and dreams unfulfilled. Tears streamed down my face as I bore witness to their suffering, my heart aching with the weight of their pain. But as I opened myself to their stories, I felt a shift, a release, as if the chains binding them to this world were breaking. One by one, the ghosts faded, their expressions softening with gratitude, the whispers quieted, the air growing still. I opened my eyes to find the chamber empty, the weight of the past lifted. I returned to the main hall, the journal clutched in my hand. The asylum was silent now, its echoes finally at rest. I knew that I had fulfilled my uncle's last wish, that I had given the forgotten the peace they deserved. As I left Eldridge, I felt a sense of closure, connection to my family's past that I had never known. The town seemed lighter, as if a shadow had been lifted. I knew that the asylum would remain, a testament to the stories it held, but its echoes would no longer haunt the halls. In the end, I realized that the past is never truly forgotten. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the memories we share, and sometimes it takes a journey into the darkness, bring those stories to light, and give voice to the echoes forgotten. We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.